Doves because it's about it's like historical fiction and it's about a conflict in India, and doves are sort of the universal symbol for peace. And obviously, during a conflict, there isn't peace, so I thought it really represented that. And throughout the book, I used doves as symbolism as well. So the area of interaction for my project was human ingenuity because it talks about using creativity to solve problems and changing how people view the world and their beliefs. And so with my book, I really wanted to show people how it's possible to sort of understand both sides of a conflict and not just side with the one that you've been told is the right one. To really learn everything you can about a topic before making up your mind. So in order to do this, I decided to write a novel and see how I could use my writing to change people's mindsets. Now, the reason I chose this was because my parents were living in India at the time of this conflict, and I've grown up hearing a lot of stories about it. So all these stories are always from their point of view and from the side of the conflict that they were on. But I never really heard much about the other side. And when I started doing research for this project, almost everything I found talked about only the other side of the story. So this way I had two resources, like two very opinionated resources on both sides of the conflict. And I thought that with this knowledge, I'd be able to write a novel that really showcased both sides. So for the first month, what I did was I started reading books more than I usually do to get a sense of what my writing style should be like. Some books that really inspired my writing style were Flipped, which I read many years ago, but the idea that the author uses in changing perspective every chapter was one I included, and I have 3 or 4 perspectives in my book. One author whose writing style I really liked was John Green, and so I read almost every one of his books during this 1 month, and I really like how with his writing he often breaks the fourth wall, which means that he talks to the reader, and I feel like this just makes writing more personalized and more interesting for readers. So I tried to incorporate that in my story as well. When I started off, my process was that the first thing I did was I did research on how to write and what my writing style would be like. And so when I was doing this research, as I said before, first thing I did was I read a lot of books and tried to get a sense of my writing style. And then I used websites like Writer's Digest, which is written by famous authors like Orson Scott Card, and they give you tips for more detailed aspects of writing, such as how to write from perspectives, which was one lesson that I really used. Then I sat down and I created an outline of my plot, so I had a basic idea of what my story was going to look like. And then I would do things like, for example, as I said before, I used the doves as a symbol. So I would write in my outline some ideas of how I could use symbolism and I could use imagery as I went along. Then I really just started to write. I didn't do too much other research before I started writing, and I researched along the way. So since it's a historical fiction novel, a lot of my research, a lot of my book is oriented towards history, and this history has to be accurate. So I had to constantly go back and fact check and make sure everything I was saying was something that actually happened. And one struggle that came along because of this was maintaining my time period. So this book takes place around 1984, and I found myself writing about things that didn't exist in 1984. So I would, for example, I'd have the girl listening to her iPod, but there weren't iPods in 1984. So I had to go back and change a lot of things, and it was just one of those challenges I never thought I would have. But I really learned a lot from that. Another big challenge I had was learning how to differentiate between my characters. So as I mentioned before, I alternate perspectives every chapter, and there was a point where all my characters did sound like the same person, and the story became really confusing because it sounded like one person having all these different experiences that didn't really make much sense. So learning how to differentiate my characters and their voices different was a big deal for me. And finally, like one of the biggest struggles I had, which I definitely did not think I would have at the beginning of this project, was choosing names for my characters. So I really wanted my characters to have names that had some sort of significance, and in doing so, I spent 2 hours choosing like each name because I wanted them to like have all these certain elements, and I had to like the name too. And in hindsight, I feel like I could have just given them any arbitrary name or just left them unnamed for the time being and tried to actually work on writing the story and then come back to the names, and that might have been more effective. So in the end, what I have is I have a novel in progress. So yes, it's not completely done yet because again, like in a 3-month period, it's hard to finish an entire novel. But I think I made pretty good progress on it, and my goal is to keep working on this and one day get it published, hopefully before I finish high school. And the 3 main things I've learned from this project were how to eliminate bias as much as possible. Like I said before, it's a story of a conflict, and with all conflicts, there's 2 sides. And I learned that it's not possible to ever write without any bias, but it is possible to write with an equal amount of bias on both sides. So instead of trying to make a character that was completely neutral, I instead made 2 characters, one that was all for one side, one that was all for the other side, so the reader gets a good look at both perspectives. I learned how to organize a storyline. My storyline does not go in chronological order, and learning how to do that effectively was a challenge, but it's something that I've learned, and I think I'll definitely use that in the future. And lastly, how to find resources efficiently, because again, when you're dealing with such an opinionated topic, it's hard to find resources without bias, and then I learned how to use resources, even those that